the syllabus yet?
Yeah, on campus.
Yeah, it's on campus. So there are going to be some individual presentations. Maybe, I think we'll begin them after midterm. So you would choose something related to psychology to present. So maybe some of your ideas on psychological behavior involving hackers or something. That might be kind of cool. Okay, think about this one. So yeah, take a look at the syllabus when you get the chance. We can get some ideas. How about the rest of you? Anything interesting? We got another new face back there trying to hide. And who are you, sir?
Ryan.
Ryan?
Ryan.
Nice to meet you. What year are you? Freshman. And what's your major? Cybersecurity. And what do you hope to learn about the course? This course? Yeah. What do you want to learn? Pretty not sure. What do you hope to learn in this course? Okay. All right. Last week and also Tuesday, we kind of gave the history of psychology, right? Remember that? We talked about where psychology derives from. We said it derives from philosophy, right? And it branched off and became a scientific field as people got more serious about mental processes, how the brain impacts our experience, how the brain also controls our body, how we sense and perceive the world, all these different things. So we talked about Freud, Harrison, B.F. Skinner, big sort of individuals who came up with different kind of theories in terms of behavior, in terms of thinking, in terms of learning, memory, right? All these different kind of big ideas. Today we'll talk about the brain, how the brain impacts all of it. So here we kind of get into neuropsychology or neurology. How do you think? What do you think, right? So we're going to look at how the brain makes you think certain ways, how the brain makes you feel certain ways, how the brain makes you flood your organs with different chemicals. Right? How does it all make sense? Where's the communication? All right, so brain and behavior. Okay, first thing we're going to start off with is neuron, right? So this is going to be our starting point. The simplest way to think about how your brain functions is like an electrical cord. Right? You say, man, there are 100 billion small electrical cords in my brain, and they're used to pass signals. Those signals are messages, right? They're messages. Electrochemical signals. So there's actual electricity constantly being emitted in your brain, right? Constantly. Little sharks, little sparks, kind of think of, right? So that will be our starting point. So get in your mind like, hey, in my brain there's 100 billion or more of these little tiny chemical signals that can transmit in some way. So we'll start here with the neuron. The neuron, individual nerve cells, 100 billion in your brain, right? So we're like, hey, this is the entire cell itself. This is your entire neuron cell, right? We got other things, glial cells, right? We're not gonna really see those, but they're cells that support this, that just send nutrients, fatty substances, things to make sure it functions properly, right? Okay, so neurons are interconnected in vast networks, giving rise to intelligence and consciousness. So you're like, well, it's a web, right? It's kind of a web of connected neural networks, right? Big web, a cluster of these things thing we start off with is the soma, or the cell body. Remember, soma is the word, Latin word for body, right? The cell body, this is where the cell holds all of this key information, like any other cell. Think of it like a program or a code with a computer. It holds coded information to say, this is your function, this is your reason, this is what you should do. So fascinating. Inside of all of our cells, we say, hey, we need proteins, things that can build structures. So in your cell, there are little walking structures. There's little tiny things that look like robots, and they do things, they move, they look like they have arms and legs, right? All of that, and they're making things happen inside of everyone's cells, right? But it's the self-life center that supports it. All right, beyond that, we say, hey, we have these dendrites, which kind of look like branches on a tree. So these dendrites receive messages from other cells. So, let's just imagine that there's another cell. These dendrites are taking in messages that the other cell is shooting over, passing, right? All right, beyond that, we have the axon. So if you think of the axon as the highway where the signal will be transmitted, right? This highway system. So remember, once again, we say, hey, it's kind of like an electrical cord. Because if this is coordinating inside of the computer, it's like copper. We need something to send the electrical signal efficiently. And copper, like something that is conducts that electricity able to pass it through. Beyond that, axon, we have here what we call a myelin sheath. So you can kind of think of the myelin sheath as the coating of a wire. Like, hey, a wire has a coating for what purpose? Why does a wire has a coating around it? What's the point of it? Why is it wrapped in something? Why is the copper wire wrapped in something? What's the point? What's the reason for that? Yeah, but what about it? What's the purpose to have it coated, not exposed? Yeah, like if you want to protect the signal, protect the energy, also escape, and it won't be efficient, right? It won't be a certain voltage or anything like that. You want it to be efficient, to do exactly the same amount than what it's supposed to do each time. So we can think of the myelin sheath as this fatty substance that coats the axon to make sure that the signal passes through efficiently, quickly, efficiently. If we didn't have that, the signal might escape all over. We don't want that. And then at the end, we have these terminal branches of the axon, right? And those are also connected to other cells, right? Like where here, you were receiving messages, here you're shooting out the message, right? Shooting out the messages. You have branches here, you have branches here, coming on the highway, and it shoots out. You're like, well, how does it happen? Well, it happens with this electrical signal traveling down an axon, which we call a neural impulse. So think of this idea. You have in each one of these cells a potential for an impulse. Right? If there's no impulse, that cell is relaxing, it's resting, it's at rest. Right? It has a certain chemical charge even at rest. It still has electrical charge even at rest. And once it reaches a certain point of electrical impulse, then it activates and shoots and creates a signal in your brain to do something. Right? Well, to talk, to think, to have an emotion, to feel, to do something. Right? So that's what we'll call an action potential, which we'll learn about here. All right, so we said dendrites receive messages, soma, that cell body, receive messages, sends messages, and axon carries information down the cell. Then the terminals are the little branches that carries other messages. All right, so we say, hey, you know what? With that electrical charge we talked about in your neuron, right? It can be at rest. It's resting. Let's say while at rest, it could be at negative happening to you right now? Remember I said, hey, that unconscious mind is always on. Right now you're tapping your feet, touching your nose, touching your hair, trying to pay attention, whatever the case may be. That's an unconscious mind. And it's still activated. It's still charged up doing something. Else you won't be able to move it off. So it's always on in some way. But at that threshold is when it shoots off and fires. And we call that an action potential. So that action potential, we say, is a nerve impulse triggered when a neuron reaches its threshold or trigger point for firing. It's either on or off. There's no in between. You either have an impulse or you don't. There's no partial impulse. Right? It either shoots off or it doesn't shoot off. All right, then we have ion channels, little openings through that axon membrane. And if you could go back, think of just basic chemistry, even things like, or basic biology, right? You can think of, hey, you have chemicals in your body and even in your brain. You have base chemicals like sodium, calcium, potassium, which you need just to live and just to think. Right, so these ions, kind of the main ones, which are part of that charge that helps that signal, are things like sodium, calcium, potassium. You need base, nutrients to just make your brain function. But there's some tiny openings that allow these things to go through. During an action potential, an ion channel is open, allowing positive ions to rush in, briefly pushing the electrical charge all the way up. We said resting was about -6 millivolts or -70 to +30. Right, so that charge is activated and it becomes a positive charge, and therefore we have that action potential. All right, so say, hey, it's all or nothing, right? It's gonna occur completely or not at all. And then after that, we have negative after potential. So once again, after it shoots off an impulse, now your neuron relaxes back. It goes back to whatever, -50, -70 millivolts. It needs time to recharge. It doesn't really happen at the speed of light, right? Not even electricity really happens. A little close to it. But like you need time to recharge, and therefore there's a negative after potential, right? So you kind of go back to a resting state so that you fire another impulse again. And we said myelin is that fatty layer that coats the highway, those axons, and saltatory conduction nerve impulses conducted down the axons and neurons code with myelin jump or saltate. Alright, synapse. Let me see if I can pull up a picture of synapse. Because the interesting thing is, guess what? These neurons, they don't physically touch. There's a gap in between each one. You got 150 billion of them. None of them actually touch. Right? And none of them actually touch. When we said the world is an interesting place, there's a difference between your perception and maybe actual absolute reality. Remember we said if I touch the table and I push down kind of like, wait, Dr. Ross, makes no sense. Letters don't have colors. Exactly. Right? So how we perceive things not often even make sense. Right? But usually you're taught A is for apple. When you think of A, usually red comes in. Maybe when you think of blue, when you think of B, you may think of blue. Colors, but letters don't have colors, so that doesn't make sense. All right. Okay, interesting thing. So let's see if we can get a picture of the synapse. Synapse. Remember we said these neurons don't touch. You would think they should, right? But how do you get the signal from one neuron to the next? Right? It skips a gap. Right? So here in your neuron you have what we call a synaptic gap. Right? So you have these little signals, these little chemical electrical signals. And they're gonna go from one synapse to the next, right? Send, receive. What happens is it gets shot over to the next, but not all of it. So whatever the chemical signal is, not all of it gets shot over. Some of it gets kept by the firing neuron. Some of it gets withheld. Some of it actually gets reabsorbed. Right? So there's a reabsorption back into some of the chemicals, which means it doesn't flood 100% of all the chemicals. Right? This probably keeps some so that the next one has the ability to give you enough. So it kind of works like an efficient machine. Okay, neurotransmitters. So we say, hey, the synapse, microscopic space between the two neurons. That's that gap. Neurotransmitters, chemicals that alter activity when they cross the synaptic gap and attach to receptor sites on the next neuron. So you're like, hey, these are the signals that go from one synapse or one neuron to the next. Really important things. Some of these things excite the next neuron, and some of these things block messages. So for example, anyone here taking hardcore drugs? Right? For example, let's say you are in a ton of pain. You know, let me start, I'll do that in a second. First, I go to my drug dealer first thing in the morning at Dunkin' Donuts. And I say, hey, Mr. Drug Dealer, give me the most widely abused drug on the planet. And he says, here's your coffee with the caffeine. Caffeine is a drug, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, so I say, give me the most widely used drug that's legal. And he said, well, here's your caffeine, Dr. Ross. Right, thank you. Right? Now with that caffeine, I drink it, and what happens to me when I drink it? How do I feel? What does it do? What does caffeine do for you?
For me personally, it gives me really headaches.
Okay. What else?
Gets me tired.
All right. Some people say tired.
You can make me say it all day.
Spikes, energy spike.
All right. So some say energy. Some people say, hey, it messes with your sleep.
Crash.
Some people say it makes you have a crash. Some people say it makes you tired. Some people say it gives you like. Well, what caffeine does? As we said, was that?
Heart palpitations.
Yeah, you get palpitations as well too. what caffeine does is it blocks other neurotransmitters from doing its job, right? Such as like serotonin. You say, hey, you need serotonin to get relaxed, chill, and go to sleep. You want to go to sleep. That seems pretty normal. Caffeine says, no, I'm going to block that neurotransmitter. I'm going to block that signal so that you feel alert and awake. The pupils open up and dilate, right? And now you don't want to go to sleep for the most part. You can't have an adverse effect. We said on certain people. But so we're saying, hey, some neurotransmitters block other signals, and some of them actually bind and excite you to do something. So think of any sort of drug that you could take. Like, man, what does this drug do? Like, it blocks something. It may block pain. So imagine if you take morphine or any kind of drug that kind of blocks pain signals. You feel wonderful. You're like, oh, I got shot or I got stabbed. I can't even feel it. I want some morphine. I feel great. But what you actually hurt physically, there's pain there. You can't feel it. Blocks some signals. Right? And some things you're like, hey, it does something attached and makes you have a different type of impulse. It actually makes you do something or want to activate something, right? So they kind of do two separate things. So we're saying neurotransmitter, chemicals that alter activity when they cross a synaptic gap and attach to receptor sites on the next neuron. Some of them excite the next neuron, and some inhibit the next neuron. Some of them excite, some of them inhibit or block, right? And then receptor site, area on the surface of neurons and other cells that's sensitive to neurotransmitters or hormones. We'll talk about hormones too. They're a little bit different because we're talking about endocrine system, which are liver, kidney, pituitary gland, things with glands that excrete chemicals to make things happen. All right, so here's some major neurotransmitters. Acetylcholine. This one excites. Excitatory neurotransmitter that participates in movement. So this one creates an impulse to make you move. This one creates an impulse for you to have autonomic functions. We'll talk about that. That simply means internal things that happen on their own without you thinking. Heart beating, breathing, digestion, want to go to the bathroom, anything that you don't need to think about takes care of itself. As well as excites for learning and excites for memory. Dopamine. Anyone's ever heard of dopamine? What does dopamine do as far as what you know?
I guess like a sort of feel good.
Feel good?
Yeah.
All right, feel good. Who can think of an instance where you feel like you get high dopamine? What kind of circumstances?
You eat. You eat.
Yeah. Feels good, right? TikTok.
Caffeine.
Caffeine, right? When you're on social media, you see a funny story, now you want to get it, you want to click to the next one, right? So dopamine, once again, excites, participates in motivation, so it motivates you, it rewards you, you feel good, you want to continue doing something that's pleasurable, right? And it helps in planning of behavior. Now, for some of you who missed class briefly, we talked about, hey, there's a couple kind of modes in how we learn. One we said was classical learning or classical conditioning with that Pavlov's dog, right? The dog thinks the sound of the bell is food, salivates, right? It's going to keep salivating because it thinks bell is related to food. Bell stops ringing, dog stops salivating. Food doesn't come after a while, and the bell keeps ringing, dog stops salivating. Dog figured out that no more food's coming after hours. And then we said there was operant conditioning with that B of Skinner kind of thought. That usually all human behavior is because we're being rewarded with something, positive reinforcement, or something being taken away, negative reinforcement. And that will kind of make us behave to do something or not to do something. Right? So this kind of relates to that. Like, because this deals with reward and motivation, right? So it usually means behavior will follow very very strongly there's a lot of dopamine. Hence why TikTok is addictive. Why is TikTok addictive? More addictive than other social media platforms. What's the observation here? What is it about TikTok? Like, all right, it's more entertainment, maybe. What is it about? You think of anything about TikTok that could make it more addictive than other platforms? It's quicker bursts. It's shorter videos. Right? Everything makes the attention smaller. And what it is, you're getting dopamine in more doses. Right? Say you watch a 15-minute video, you're like, all right, this is cool. And then the climax of the video happened, and now you get your dopamine 5 minutes in. But on TikTok, you're like, 5 seconds, dopamine, another 5 seconds. Keep doing it. Right? Because if you get that reward, it means you're going to plan on keep doing the thing. Same thing will happen if you ever become addicted to any drug. We're like, hey, wait, how strong is that transmitter? Either it's blocking something, exciting something, like, well, this one excites a lot. Probably gonna have a proclivity to be more addicted, right? And you need it more. You're like, well, this one excites less. Like, okay, it's good enough, but I don't need it as much, right? So like things like crack and meth, like, whoa, that excites something so much, or it blocks, because we say a lot of things block pain. Remember, I said one of the greatest feelings you could ever have is you don't feel any pain. Now, pain doesn't just mean like you feel actual torturous pain. Pain means you're not annoyed no more, you're not stressed no more. That's pain too. So imagine if you're in a state of mind where you literally do not care about anything. That would be one of the greatest feelings you ever have in existence. So here's a story, right? Anyone here ever had their wisdom teeth removed? Anyone here has wisdom teeth? Right. Wisdom teeth continue to grow. So usually about your mid-20s or mid to late 20s is when it stops growing. Right? So some of you may not have any ever come in, and some of you there might come in a couple years or something. Right? Like, oh, it's bothering me. Right? But usually they give people problems because of way in the back of your teeth, either people don't clean them properly or they don't fit in your mouth properly. Something happens, you want to get it removed. So I had 4 wisdom teeth, and I was like in my mid-20s, and I was like, man, I gotta get these out. They're like painful. And so I went, well, they're like, hey, you know what? We could take each one out as they bother you. I'm like, no, take all 4 out at once. Because I don't know if I'm gonna come back here again, right? Get it over and done. And so what happens is they put me under, take the wisdom teeth out, but like a day or 2 later, it's like some of the strongest pain I've felt in my life. Like unbearable pain. Like tooth pain is some of the worst pain you can ever feel. So what they gave me was Vicodin. Anyone ever been on Vicodin? No. So Vicodin blocks pain. Blocks those pain receptors. So when I was on Vicodin for like the first week, I'm like, oh my goodness, what is this feeling? It was the greatest feeling I ever had in my life, just being on Vicodin. So much so that, hey, I didn't feel any pain really after like the first week, and they gave me a 30 like a month amount of Vicodin, and I'm like, I gotta finish the rest of the bottle. Right, so I finished the bottle anyway because maybe I was a little bit addicted to Vicodin for a month. So it felt good, right? So it goes to show you, like, even if you have strong willpower or whatnot, you can easily become addicted to any drug. Very, very easily, especially ones that stop pain. And there's a lot of drugs that block that signal from pain receptors because it makes you just feel like you don't care. It was so bad. I felt so good that I was like, if I read that half the planet blew up, I'd be like, I'm just gonna take a nap. That's how I didn't care about anything. But you literally do not feel nothing. Felt good. Okay, so we said dopamine excites motivation, reward, planning, and behavior. GABA is another neurotransmitter. It inhibits, right? And it exerts inhibitory control of the central nervous system and participates in movements. So it blocks out signals that might can shake up your mood, right? Another one, glutamine excites, right? Excitatory neurotransmitter that exerts control over central nervous system. And we'll learn about the central nervous system. Participates in learning and memory. Norepinephrine excites again, participates in arousal, vigilance, and mood. And then serotonin. Many of you probably heard of serotonin. Anyone here ever take sleeping pills to help you sleep, right? So you're involved in things that involve serotonin, right? Say this one helps with mood, appetite, and sleep. So they're kind of connected. All these are connected, right? Like, well, mood, appetite, and sleep are connected. If you don't get enough sleep, you're in a bad mood, right? If you don't eat, you're normally hangry, affects mood, right? If you're not eating healthy, you probably can't sleep well, it also affects mood. So they're all interconnected. So serotonin is very important because sleep is huge and usually impacts your mood and appetite as well too. All right. Neuropeptides regulate activity of other neurons, right? So how they operate. Encaphalins relieve pain and stress, similar to endorphins. We just talked about things that's related to endorphins, right? Release by the pituitary gland also help to relieve pain, right? So things that maybe block out pain. And then placebos. What's a placebo?
Something that you think is gonna do something, but it doesn't do anything. It'll make you feel like it's working.
Yeah, like basically a false statement you can take, but maybe you don't know that it's false, and therefore you still have the reaction that of a good feeling. Maybe it actually helps you in some way, right?
It's more like a side effect.
Yes, a side effect or something, or it helps you manifest the same sort of expression that you would have because you believe that you took that other thing, right? In essence. So it goes to show you the mind is powerful. All you really have done is maybe you flooded those signals that you wasn't having, and you did that mentally, right? Maybe you did that mentally, not because of a chemical agent, like a pill or something. So the mind is powerful. If that's true, then we know that the mind can actually regulate. You can regulate your own mood without substances. You can regulate your own appetite without substances. You can basically use your own mind to override a lot of negative things that are happening. All right, we're going to get to central nervous system. So, all right, neurons, synapses, each other form neural networks. We say 150 billion of these neurons. They're not touching, but they're part of this big web of the neural network. So we say they combine things that excite, things that block or inhibit information from input neurons into the decision of fire and action. Right? Neural networks are neuroplastic. They allow our brains to change response to experience. So, once again, if you learn something new, let's say you learn a new word, you literally have connected a new branch. Let's say you stop learning, it will go away. You prune the branches, and now there's fewer branches touching. You're not using your brain, right? So over time, you can change and mold and shape this network. So the more you learn, the more network, the broader the network you have is. And that's what we call plasticity. It means you can constantly always learn and increase your network. Right? Now I'll tell you, one of the key indicators for broad intelligence is when people can connect things that other people can't connect. So if you could say, man, I could relate psychology to 150 other fields. I could relate psychology to cybersecurity, right? I could relate economics to physics. I could relate whatever, right? To something. That shows a broad neural network. You know how to associate how things they don't have the connection to see how things are kind of very much similar and connected with something. All right, central nervous system and peripheral. So we got two. I'm gonna show you a picture on the next one. Okay, so beyond that, you have two nervous systems in your body. They serve distinct purposes, right? You have your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord. All those neurons there, right? All those nerves going there. The second part, you have the ones that are attached to the spine that spread out to your arms, legs, and rest of the body. We call that peripheral, right? Outside of the brain and also the spinal cord, they flood out. Right? You need these things because you need nerves. You need nerves to feel your fingers. You need nerves to sense temperature, touch, and pain. You need these things all over, right? But the central is the one that's related to the brain and spinal cord. Peripheral is the one that's spread out. The brain and spinal cord has its own one because guess what? What do you think will happen? Let's say we opened up the top of your brain, top of your skull. And we took some heavy device and tried to yank your brain out from the top. Do you think the spinal cord will come out? Or do you think the brain will just pop out?
Brain with spinal. Brain with the spinal cords.
You think it will come out together? Right through prenatal phase, the brain and the spinal cord are essentially fused together. Like you would think they're like two completely separate things, but in your like prenatal development, while your mom's womb, they're like fused. So if you took a contraption like yank, tried to yank their brain, the spinal cord would come with the whole thing. That's how strongly bonded they are. Now, yeah, maybe you can chop them in half if you can horizontally, but that's why they are kind of placed together. They're all part of really one. All right, so we say, hey, brain and spinal cord is central. All these other nerves, neurons, peripheral, right? Neurons are single nerve cells. Nerves are large bundles of many neural axons, right? So these are all the highway system, those axons traveling out, send the signals from the toe, like the brain, fingers, like the brain. Neural lining and layer cells wrapped around axons outside of brain and spinal cord forms a tunnel that damaged fibers allows to repair themselves. You really need to remember that. Okay, then we have the somatic nervous system, part of that peripheral, right? This carries messages to and from skeletal muscles and sense organs, controls voluntary behavior. Right, so these are important because they allow for your movement, to move your bones, your muscles, and everything else that you do consciously, that you use your brain to control. Right, I want to do this, I'm going to move this way. Okay? That autonomic nervous system, we say, controls internal organs and glands that are automatic. Heart rate, digestion, blood pressure. You're not thinking about that stuff, you're not thinking about breathing, not thinking about heart beating. It happens on its own. And that autonomic nervous system controls it and makes sure it keeps functioning, keep going. All right, so why do we even need that autonomic nervous system? Right, they're broken up in kind of two branches. One is sympathetic, parasympathetic, fight or flight, for the most part, right? So, for example, sympathetic arouses the body and it's your emergency system, think flight. So, think of this. You go out and like, hey, I'm gonna go for a jog. You start running, what happens to your heart? You start running. Faster. What happens to your breathing? Start breathing harder. kind of the flight system. And really, you think from an evolutionary standpoint, you're like, well, you need that in order to survive. If you're being attacked by some lions in the wilderness, you need everything to jack up so you can get out of here quick. Right? So same what happened now. So there's gunshots outside. Quick response, your body will have a reflex and kick everything up. Your blood sugar will go up. Your blood pressure will go up. More oxygen in your lungs, all this. And guess what else happens? It'll tell your digestive system to stop. We can't go this pattern right now, we're in danger. So since the signal said, calm down, make sure while we're running, that we're not gonna have to go to the bathroom. Right? So it has a purpose really just for survival, but it's an interesting thing. The parasympathetic, man, like, all right, now I ran so fast, I'm out of breath. What would happen if that never stops? Just like constant breathing hard, my heart rate's up. Eventually you'll die. So obviously you need another system to bring it back down to your resting state. Bring your blood sugar back, your blood pressure back to normal resting state. And that's the parasympathetic branch. Quiets the body, most active after an emotional event. Combined activity of both branches determine degree of bodily arousal. So we could just think of a lie detector. Like in a lie detector test, what are they measuring to know if someone's lying? How could they know somebody's lying? How could the FBI hook you up in the day? I think we could use this information to go to court and prove your lying.
Nurse or?
Yeah, they're measuring these things. They're measuring that you at rest, resting state, all the levels are normal. Blood sugar, blood pressure, breathing, heart rate, etc. Hook you up to the machine. We might even get you real relaxed. Bring you some water, might bring you a nice meal so that you can get real chill and comfortable. And then we want to like ask you basic questions. And then we'll throw a random question. One that really matters. We'll see the physical response. Because think about that. Unless you are a psychopath or a sociopath, and we'll talk about what all of that is, a normal person will have a response if they know something's not the truth. Right? You can fake it on the phone with somebody in line. They can't get all of that information. But if you're hooked up to a machine and we ask you about something that you know is a lie, usually there's a response. The body kind of tenses up. Right? So always remember that a good person can actually know who's lying just off body language. Right? You can catch a person up with it. Unless psychopaths and sociopaths. Because they don't have the response that a normal person has. That's what makes them different. Like I said before, raise your hand if you're a psychopath or a sociopath. You said that last time. And how did you determine that you were that? You have influence about anything? Nobody? Mom? Dad? Well, you have well, I guess you care about education, right? Okay, so you're just here, right? But yeah, so unless you're really that, you will have a natural reaction mechanism, right? So yeah, very important, fight or flight, up or down, bring things back to normal, take things back up, or survival, right? All right, the brain, the spinal cord connects the brain to other parts of the body, spinal nerves, 31 pairs, cranial nerves, attached to the brain, 12 pairs. You don't need to remember how many pairs. All right, and then we have the spinal cord in some way, you could kind of say it has a mind of its own because it's connected to so many different neurons and nerves that oftentimes it will react on its own. Which means you may not even need the brain to really be activated for it to do something. We call these things reflexes. before you feel the pain, even before your brain gets the actual signal of pain, your hand will move. Like, well, who moved it? A lot of the attachments to the spinal cord reflex are, yes.
So what would be the difference between that and subconscious?
Yes, very good question. So yes, actually, it's part of the unconscious mind to some degree, right? Because the unconscious mind does not need rational thought, it does not need thinking to happen, right? Unconscious mind is attached to that autonomic nervous system, right? In some way, which means that autonomic nervous system needs things, food, warmth. It's going to desire whether you think about it, right? So yes, good question. So yes, the reflex arc simplest behavior occurs when the stimulus provokes an automatic response in the spinal cord without involving the brain. Think about that. Think of all your movements just during this class. Literally, maybe 5% of them are actual conscious stuff. Right? Touch your hair, tap your feet. So think of this concept. Like, wait, there's an alien brain. The oldest part, we'll see with the brain, it's really what we call a reptilian brain, primitive brain. We call it maybe an alien. It does what it wants to do when you think about it. You're like, why is it doing this stuff? Why do you need to tap your feet? Why do you need to touch your face? Why do you need to do this? It constantly wants to be back at zero. So other things are happening. There could be thoughts in your mind, you're like, oh, that's a bad thought. And now your body's feeling stress. It goes up a little bit. And then you move your feet, touch your face, to try to bring it down. So it means we're constantly stressed creatures. We're thinking about things all the time. We have emotions, unconscious emotions. And our body's reacting and doing stuff. Okay? Even if you're tired, that's just a reflex. Yawning, right? Yawning is a reflex. Where does yawning come from? Gesticulation. We actually don't have a purpose for yawning anymore. Why would we have it in the first place? What's the point of yawning?
Send more oxygen to the brain to maintain weight.
Potentially, right? Yawning does exhale more carbon dioxide. It's like the exhale part is stronger, which is carbon dioxide. Taken in is oxygen, right? Plants do the opposite. Plants take carbon dioxide, photosynthesis, and shoots out oxygen so we can breathe it. And when we shoot out carbon dioxide so the plants can have it. It's kind of certain thing. But think of it, from an evolutionary perspective, yawning is a signal, because we're social creatures, to let each other know that we're tired, so that they can take over the shift to watch out for the lions, the tigers, the bears, so we don't get eaten alive. It's something that's kind of left over. We don't necessarily need it in contemporary society, because like, no lions and tigers and bears. But it's something kind of left over there, right? Eventually it may go away. Right? There's a lot of things kind of left over that we kind of feel that the environment has evolved and maybe we don't even need it anymore. Right? So yawning is one of those things, that evolutionary kind of left over to a degree. Alright, so we got all these neurons, sensory neurons, right? Things that carry messages from the senses towards the central nervous system, right? You need to sense it, touch, taste, smell, etc. Connected neurons, nerve cells that link to others. Motor neurons, nerve cells that carry commands from the central nervous system to muscles and glands to do functions. So here's a picture of the brain. But before we get kind of into the details, let's start from the bigger part of the brain. You're like, hey, the brain has primarily 5 sort of huge areas that have certain different functions, right? This one doesn't show it, but let's just say we have this area, which I said is kind of probably the most important, right? This is the most important part of the brain. We call it the reptilian say this part of your brain is controlled for a lot of those autonomic systems: breathing, heart beating, digestion, other things. So guess what? If you have damage here, you're a goner. Usually you're a goner. Right? You might get damaged, all these other parts of the brain, and you're still alive. Why? You still breathe automatically. You still heartbeat automatically. You still digest food automatically. If you get damage to the back of the base of your brain, one, if you got it here on the spinal cord, the signal stops. You're like, oh, the brain is supposed to send all these signals and process. More signals come up and interpret and make sense of the world. If you get damage in the spinal cord, you block the signal. Now you can't even walk. You can't even feel it. Like I'm pinching your finger, you can't feel it. No, I'm paralyzed. Right? There's no signal. But if you got to this part, like the dura, the cerebellum, then you're like, guess what? You can't breathe on your own. You have to think about breathing. Or they gotta put you on a machine. Your heart can't even beat on its own. Things like that. So there's a famous actor named Christopher Reeves. Anyone ever heard of Christopher Reeves? All right, Christopher Reeves, oh, you have? Okay. Christopher Reeves was super popular, say, 80s and then like the 90s before he got sick. And he played Superman. So like the first big time blockbuster Superman movies, Christopher Reeves, everybody's like, oh, that's Superman. But he played in other ones. He's a great actor, tall, 6'4", strong guy. And he was riding one of his horses, and he fell off the horse and like hit his head and like damaged this part of the brain around like the dura area. And for the rest of his life, he was in a wheelchair, and he had to think about breathing. It's on a machine. So like when they would do interviews, think about it. It takes breathing for you to speak. You lose some oxygen when you speak. Right? So like even when they try to do interviews, he has to remember to like suck in oxygen. Like later in life. It's very tragic because he was like, you know, big time, right? Super handsome guy, tall, big, strong, and then in a wheelchair, thinking, you know, they're trying to interview him, and it's like, and then trying to talk in between breaths. Yes, sir.
What about in your sleep?
Yes. So he had to be on the machine. Yeah. So
At night, to be in a machine. Right?
yeah, he had to be on the machine, but even still, that was a complication. Because sometimes the machine wasn't even allowed to break. He essentially had to lose sleep too. So think about that. Over time, if you're not getting proper sleep, you're a goner. It's just a matter of time. It matters the severity, right? That's why you think of like, hey man, they're on life support machine. Like, oh man, that person got shot, right? Or somebody's on life support. You're like, what's the machine has to support their breathing? Because that message is not going there automatically. Right, and that's why they say brain dead. You're like, what brain dead? You're like, well, from here to here, it's disturbed. There's no movement, there's no signal. We can use the machine and make it keep the regular stuff on, but that person's in essence dead. And we look at the system of how this operates with the transmission systems. Okay, all right, so back to the bigger parts. We got frontal, flesh, parietal, occipital, temporal. Kind of easy to remember, right? Occipital covers mostly vision, spatial awareness and vision, right? Temporal, off to the sides, we're talking about hearing and other kind of auditory functions. Frontal, we say this kind of central processing, right? Frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex, managing the information, processing the information, make a decision, make a choice, which one, pick something, right? And parietal helps with things like memory and bodily movement, things of that nature, right? That gets more complicated kind of once we get underneath. Cortex, right? Cortices. So usually when you hear cortex, you're talking about the outermost layer of the brain. So whenever you hear that word, kind of like, okay, the outermost Alright, so how do we map the brain? It's like, hey, before we had the great technology of being able to scan things and measure things, we just kind of had to open people up, dissect them, so we really couldn't see how people thought. But we said if all this is electrical and chemical, it should be for a way for us to detect it, right? Like which part of the brain is lit up with activity, right? Which part of the brain is not lit up, right? Maybe we can have someone do an exercise or an activity and we're like, this is supposed to be lit up, right? It's not, so you have some sort of issue there, so we kind of know where to focus on. We need to help you or something, right? Or you need a procedure. So we use all types of different things. CT scan. Anyone ever had a CT scan? Right? Alright, computer tomographic map, right? It's using computer-enhanced X-rays, right? Say X-rays can go through the body, right? X-rays can go through. X-rays of the brain or body from a number of different angles. So we can see the inside of your body just from different angles. Maybe we can see if there's some sort of injury. Like, okay, that looks weird. Maybe we're not measuring activity, we're not looking at what's lit up and what's not, but we can just see damage. Like, okay, we can clearly see your brain and now we can maybe see if there's any areas that have damage to them for some reason. MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, uses a strong magnetic field, not an X-ray, to produce a 3D image of the body's interior. Why is this important? Going back to basic physics, like whenever there's electricity, there's a field, right? Whenever there's electricity, there's an electrical magnetic field. And if you have electricity in your brain all over, you kind of map that whole field. You can model everything in a 3D kind of picture, right? Which is really interesting. So that's an MRI. So you're looking at different things. You kind of maybe get a better image because it's three-dimensional. A whole three-dimensional object. Which you can measure the whole thing from all sides. You can use a computer to turn it around, take a look at it, things like that. Alright, and maybe, for the most part, we would be focused on the localization of functions, so research strategy using some of those techniques. We're trying to look at structures of the brain with specific psychological or behavioral functions. Once again, you're looking to say, like, hey, things should be lit up for certain functions. We have to do them, and they're not, there might be an issue, right? Alright, right brain, left brain. We have two hemispheres of the brains, right? Our right and our left. Interesting enough, right hemisphere controls, left hemisphere controls right side of the body, right hemisphere controls left side of the body. Then they're merged together, fused, right? And to make everything kind of integrated, make sense of everything. So 95% of humans use their left hemisphere for language. Most people are right-hand dominant. Who are all the people in the class who are right-handed? Raise your hand if you're right-handed. Any left-handed? Your ambidextrous. So you can use both, but anyone dominant, you feel like you use more than others, or you kind of use them equally? Alright, left hemisphere, used for language. Language, of course, associated with speaking. Language, of course, sometimes you have to write language and understand it. So it makes sense. Right? The left hemisphere is good at math, right? Judging time, rhythm, coordinating order of complex movements, analyzing, breaking information into parts, and processing information sequentially. How to know what's in order, right? Have to put things in order, one past the other, one item after another. Right? So that is the left hemisphere of your brain. That's what's really used for its importance and control. The right hemisphere. Perceptual skills, such as recognizing patterns, faces, and melodies, expressing and detecting others' emotions, holistic processing, processing information together in one large chunk, and processing information simultaneously, all at one time, seeing everything into clusters. How are you going to process that? Now, here's some old kind of ideas, right? Kind of this hypothesis, right? Some people will say, well, the left hemisphere controls most of the right side, and right controls most of the left side. Someone would say that, hey, if you're left-handed, left-hand dominant, that you're more right hemisphere, right? So this is not necessarily true, but it could just be an observation that people take. So that's why more human beings are right-handed than left. So if you meet somebody left-handed, maybe pay attention to that. Right? Are they more perceptual? Are they more recognizing of patterns? Are they good at melodies and patterns? Are they good at detecting people's emotions, et cetera, et cetera? It's something to make an observation. Right? Because there's left-handed people that are right-handed. Right? But some may speculate, it's a cultural thing. We've been taught to be right-handed, so maybe that's more right-handed. Some people it's like, no, it's a genetic thing. Evolutionarily, it's more important to be left-brained, therefore right-handed, for survival than it is to be all this extra stuff for right-handed, left-handed. All right, so remember we said, hey, you know what? That lower part of the brain, there's the spinal cord, and the cerebellum was the ancient primitive part. It's the oldest part of your brain. Right? Some people say it's a reptilian brain. Makes sense because it controls all your bodily functions automatically. And so therefore, as we move towards the front of the brain, we kind of say, oh, the front of the brain is the newest part of the brain, evolutionary. Right? Hence why what separates us from most animals is that prefrontal cortex, which is right here, that constantly evolves. It keeps growing until about what age? Anyone else? What? That prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain, the last part that develops, it stops developing around what age? 25. Anyone else? Yeah, you say maybe around 25, some as late as 27, some as early as 21. It depends, right? But like this is the last part. So remember I said you can have an argument with your parent. They're like, oh man, why do you do such stupid stuff? Like, hey mom, hey dad, my prefrontal cortex is still developing. So give me a break. Right? You can have a legitimate biological sort of reason for this, right? May be related why we say we don't allow people to drink until 21. Like, well, why not 18 if they're an adult? Right? Because their brain's still developing, might make some choices. They don't know how to control, regulate the emotions, liquor, yada, yada. So our system is kind of primarily set up on evolution or the development of the brain. Our social system. All right, frontal lobe controls your sense of self, motor control, and higher mental abilities such as reasoning and planning. Right, so that frontal lobe is saying is rationalized and it plans for stuff. Right, so it's like the main center. Remember, your computer is built off of your brain too. One, you have memory in your computer, but you have a hard drive. What's the difference? You bought that computer with a certain amount of memory and a certain amount of hard drive space. What's the difference?
Memory stores temporary stuff, such as that stuff, while hard drive stores the bigger stuff.
Yeah.
Memory stuff, temporary.
Yeah. Remember we'll get to, we said you have short-term memory called working memory. Right? Means you need that information now, quick. And then you have long-term memory, which is permanent. If you learn how to ride a bike when you were obviously we're related to all sorts of issues, right? Whether it's attention issues, autism, all sorts of things, right? We'll get into all that. All right, frontal lobe, self-motor control, higher mental abilities, reason, plan. Contains primary motor cortex, right? Control bodily movements, limbs, motor control. And then we get mirror neurons. So, remember I said there were two methods of learning. There's actually a third. Right? Third is really biological, purely biological. Remember I said Pavlov's dog, associative learning, Bell food. That's how we kind of learn things, associate one thing to the next. Then we said that positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement with operant conditioning, operant learning, which we'll learn about. And then the third one is observational learning. So in our brains, back to these neurons, there are things called mirror neurons contained in the motor cortex, become active when a motor action is carried out and when another organism is observed carrying out the same action. This goes to say that in your brain you have mirror neurons to observe other human beings so that you can copy what they do or not copy. So you're basically looking at it like, man, I like that. I'm gonna copy that. I'm gonna copy how they dress. I'm gonna copy how they walk. I'm gonna copy how they talk. I'm gonna copy everything they do because I find it to be a positive thing. Or you're like, I'm not gonna do that. There's a cause and effect. Oh yeah, that person went to jail for 50 years. Make sure I don't do that. Right? So a lot of times part of our learning is just observing others because we actually have mirror neurons that says copy. Right? Mirror what this person is doing or not mirror. Right? That's kind of the third part of how we learn. Observational learning. We see cause and effect. You like it as a positive thing, do it. Don't like it. Right? Don't. Alright. I'll save some more of this, but lastly, just before you go, just to keep it interesting. We'll maybe we'll catch up on a few parts maybe on Tuesday. Okay, now we have the limbic system of the brain, right? This is a huge part of our brain. Okay, we said the limbic system controls emotions, right? The idea is that women have more complex limbic systems than men, which means that women's neurons are more dense when it comes to emotions, right? Even when it comes to thoughts, more clustered, dense, which means it's more complex. Good thing, maybe bad thing, I don't know, subjective. But kind of good if things are highly dense and clustered, that means that person might have the capability to multitask, do 20 things better potentially than men. Men might be more narrowly focused, say one thing at a time. I can do the job, but before I move on, I finish it. Right? That kind of sort of linear thing. Right? But also too, like this related to emotions. Part of this is the thalamus, relays sensory information on one way with the cortex or our switchboard, how we switch off sensory information. Hypothalamus regulates emotional behavior, huge, and motive, sex, hunger, rage, hormones, etc. Some have speculated that since men, generally speaking, we're just speaking general terms, doesn't apply to everybody, right? But like since men don't have such clusters of the neurons with emotions, that if they're flooded with emotions, they may not know how to regulate them. Hence, they may get into a fight and kill people. Aggression towards person, right? Because remember we said if women are more dense, then they have a much broader understanding potentially of emotions in themselves and in others. Men may not have that same capabilities. So when they feel emotions, they may not know what to do with them. They may not understand what to do. And they may aggressively act towards this, right? Something also I've heard this out in life, like, man, why are people so aggressive? amygdala, associated with fear response. Going back to psychopaths. Psychopaths and sociopaths. Psychopaths can't be changed. It's genetic. There's no amount of therapy on earth. There's nothing you can do. What you can do is maybe attempt to try to have them manage it. But their amygdala, their fear response is not the same as you and I. They could hear an explosion that sounds like an atomic bomb outside, they might actually not be able to respond. Like, man, I want that guy to be in the military. That guy's awesome up there. Police, military, something. Someone who's not gonna just scream out loud for everything that's to be potentially scary. You want psychopaths and sociopaths in certain areas. Think of this too. Remember we said leaders at the top, most CEOs or top level management, presidents, congressmen, senators, psychopaths and sociopaths. That's how they get there. They don't care what other people think. They don't care what the building people think. They don't care about the bad comments people comment in public. You do. You might. You might care. You might be afraid to come up there and speak in front of the class. They don't care. They don't care what you're looking at and thinking. That's actually good for leadership, but bad in social behaviors. But they can manipulate. Remember, the responses aren't real. They're manufactured. It's like an actor. Like, I don't really feel it, but I know it's like smile makes it nice. Dangerous people, but very necessary in some ways, right? But psychopaths have a deformed amygdala, is what it is. It's not the same as you and ours, therefore they don't have a fear response. They have no stress. You measure them, they can be surrounded by all the noise in the world, no stress response. You don't have it, right? You don't have a stress response. They won't have it. That's what makes them extremely, extremely dangerous. All right, that's it for today. We'll pick this back up on Tuesday. I'm going to put discussion number 2 for those of you who weren't here. Discussion 1 is up.